You're listening to Cultureful. I'm your host, Jess Lynn. This is an interview from June 1st, 2022. Hope you enjoy. My guest today is my friend Steve. He is a 36-year-old who lives in New York and is joining me today to share about his experiences with dating and relationships. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. And yourself?
I'm feeling a little sick, but yeah, it's good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for being willing to talk to me today and being on the podcast. Yeah, I'm excited to kind of dive deeper. You know, we've been friends for a while now, and I know like some of your relationship history, but it'll be nice to kind of hear more about all that stuff from you because we've seen each other like in and out throughout the years. But it'll be nice to kind of string it all together. But yeah, let's start with some background. Can you start by sharing what your family's cultural heritage is and where you grew up, just kind of, general introduction of yourself.
Okay, so both my parents are Chinese, and I moved to Italy at the age of 4, where I lived until the age of 18, and then I moved to the US. And now, obviously I live here.
So you said you were 18 when you moved over to the US. Like, what's the story of what brought you here?
Yeah, growing up in Italy, it was a very alienating experience. I faced a lot of racism there, and really just like I wanted to get out of Italy the fastest I could. And when I was 10 years old, I did a trip with my family to the US. We kind of traveled all over the States. And, I just felt so liberated. I didn't feel like I was seen as like a second-class citizen in the same way like in Italy. And so just like I really wanted to come to the US for college. And so, once I finished high school in Italy, there was really only one choice, and that was just to come to the US for college.
Mm-hmm. And then where were you for college?
At the University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
Yeah, and then what do you do now? What do you do now for work, and what do you do for fun?
I've been a photographer ever since I graduated, really. So how many years was that? I was never very good at math.
Graduated from college, 14?
Yeah, let's see here, 15 years. Okay, so I've been a photographer for 15 years. And I'm still doing that. I'm a studio photographer. And this year in January, I decided to take on a side gig, which really is actually a full-time job, doing genome sequencing. It was kind of like a childhood dream to be a scientist. And so I kind of juggle these two different careers simultaneously right now.
And the genome sequencing is full-time and the photography is part-time?
I mean, it's getting kind of full-time too this time of the year. I kind of thought I lost most of my clients during the pandemic, but then all of a sudden they all like came back. And so I'm very busy right now.
Everyone wants portraits from like all the time they missed during COVID.
Yeah, headshots, products, small businesses are kind of like coming back.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Really cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that business is rebounding and that people are out and about. Oh, yes, I skipped a question that I want to come back to. So what's your citizenship these days?
I'm a dual citizen. I'm an Italian and U.S. citizen. So I actually had to give up my Chinese citizenship when I became an Italian citizen.
Let's dive into the main topic for the interview today. Can you take me through your dating and relationship history?
Oh gosh, that is so general.
Yeah, just whatever you feel like talking about.
Because now I have to like think about my entire history and try to sum it up. I mean, it's a good question. I just like haven't prepared that.
That's good. That would be very authentic, Steve.
I think in general, when it comes to dating, throughout my life, I've had one major obstacle. That has to do with my identity.
What do you mean by that?
Gosh, this is such a complex concept here. Hold on. And what I mean by that is, throughout my life, I'd never really felt like I fit in very well. And I think when you don't fit in very well, and both in the sense of like you yourself not feeling like you fit in, and other people not seeing you as like part of the group, you kind of face a lot of challenges when it comes to dating, since in a sense, dating is an integral part of human interactions and relationships. I guess that part's like fairly obvious. But yeah, I think feeling like an outcast and being seen as an outcast has shaped a lot of my dating experiences.
Made them more different how from what you imagine it would be, or how it would have been, if you did feel like you fit in.
I mean, I think when you fit in, it's a lot easier to kind of just like follow the social protocol, right? Follow the social expectations. And you don't really have to think that much, or like really, you don't really have to like forge your own path as much. So for me, I've really kind of just like had to confront a lot of things, things like my insecurities, but also just like, what I really want, what I look for, and what other people see, and things like that. So it's like basically you have to kind of like forge your own path and figure it out on an individual basis, as opposed to just like following the large, by and large, social protocol. Where when you conform to a type, basically people don't need to get to know you as an individual as much, and it actually just like makes the interaction a lot easier. It's like basically the judgments that people make about you, if they tend to be truer, if they tend to be more accurate, then you could just like, jump into like a relationship without really having to like get to know somebody on a very individual level. And I think by and large, people don't want to spend the time to get to know people as an individual. It's difficult, and it's time consuming. I personally find it very rewarding. And so for me, I actually seek out the very people that deviate from like certain, the archetypical types in society.
I feel like that, I think that kind of explains why like we're friends. I feel like I've never felt like I fit in as a type. And yeah, I think I have a lot of friends that I feel like fit in better as, common types out there, and like find their clicks pretty easily. But I also have a lot of friends that don't, and I definitely also like notice and gravitate towards people like that, because I kind of feel, the same way about not being, a type that's easy to find my posse. But that's interesting about dating, and just, maybe like people, if they are dating someone that they think is that fits well into a certain type, maybe they already feel like they know people of that type. They don't have to, spend too much effort getting to know that individual. That's really interesting observation.
Exactly. And like, I want to stress here, like I want to stress here that I'm not poo-pooing, the fitting into like a certain archetype. On the contrary, I actually think, if I could do that, I wish I could do that, frankly, because it just makes things like so much easier, and you don't have to like think and put in as much effort. But I guess in a way, it's also less interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way too. Like, I think a lot of times, there's a lot of things I wish that I could just like, go somewhere and then find like, people of that group really easily and fit in. But I don't know. We would probably be very different people, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
So let me break down this question a little bit then. I'm curious about when you started dating, how old were you, and what was Steve at that age like? And what were some of the influences, when you were kind of early in your dating experiences, what you were kind of looking for and thinking about? I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think back to high school, basically. So
So this was in Italy.
this was in Italy,
What part of Italy was it?
Rome. So I went to an international school, and I started dating at the age of 17. So my first girlfriend was when I was 17. And I think prior to that, it was like a complete fluke, because I think prior to that, I kind of just like felt like nobody would ever like me.
Aw.
So, I mean, this is kind of like how I felt, since I was like a kid, right, growing up in Italy. Um, in high school, I was pretty solitary for the most part. I'd say that if you met me back then, you'd think that I'm definitely an introvert. Even though now, I would say that like I'm definitely an extrovert. Yeah, I was very introverted. I thought a lot, right? Like I just like kind of like philosophized a lot, and I was very serious, and I questioned a lot of things. I mean, I remember we were studying 1984 and also Brave New World. I mean, these two stories are kind of talked about as dystopias, right? These like dystopian futures. But I just remember like questioning and saying like, hey, if you actually like grew up in that society and you didn't know about an alternative, then it would actually be pretty good. And I remember just like people jumping on me and saying like, what a idiot you are and stuff. but I still felt pretty justified in the way that I thought. I guess I was kind of a contrarian in many ways, and I still am. And I always like, even from that age, like I felt like I wanted to challenge mainstream ideas and that kind of thing. Probably because I felt like I was rejected by the mainstream.
Yeah, and then you're just like, you guys, Brave New World doesn't sound that bad, you know?
Well, actually, now I mean, the more I think about it now, the more great I think it is. But yeah.
Yeah, what was the girlfriend like, and how long did that last? Yeah, what did you guys have in common, and like how fulfilling was that first relationship for you?
Okay, so that's interesting. I mean, so she was from the Czech Republic. So her father worked for the Czech embassy. And I remember she kind of joined our school, I think sophomore year. And she was kind of a loner for a long time. She was very introverted. And then I just remember like all of the nerds were just like really like into her.
Uh-huh.
And I kind of didn't see it coming that like she took an interest in me. So it was definitely like a huge boost for my self-esteem. How fulfilling was it? I guess when you're that age and you've never experienced anything prior, it felt pretty fulfilling. Most of the times that we spent together involved just walking around Rome. Like we walked around Rome so much, and like I just feel like I know the whole city like the back of my hand, because like that's just what we did all the time. Just like walk around, and then go to a part, and then like that was like the extent of like our relationship basically.
Uh-huh.
And this all, I mean, if you think about it, in some ways it's kind of romantic, because it was like it all took place like amongst like the Roman ruins and stuff. But still no different than just like two horny teenagers.
Yeah, so if you didn't see it coming, how did it happen? Like, how did you guys get together? What was the story with that?
It's been a long time. Give me a second. How did that happen? I guess we must have taken some classes together. I don't remember really noticing her that much, actually, to be honest. But then it was just like one day, like it was like very obvious that like she wanted to talk to me. And then the way it happened was I was going home, and I had to like take this train. I was like we were living the outskirts of Rome. And she's like, oh, I'll take the train with you and like, walk you home kind of thing. And then we got to my stop, got off, and then said goodbye. And then I remember like we kind of just like hugged. And that was like the first time I think I hugged a girl, and it was like very exciting. So that was kind of how it started. I think even though it was just like a hug, it was like very clear that like there was no question that we liked each other. So it made it easy, right? Because like most of the time, like people waste time and like trying to figure out if the other person likes them. And so, the good thing there was that like she was pretty bold, and like I didn't have to, do any investigative work, so to speak.
Uh-huh. So that was your first relationship. Did it just end when you were moving?
And then no, yeah, I remember it was actually the way it ended was very dramatic. she went back to the Czech Republic for spring break, and then like met some guy at a music festival, and then came back and broke up with me.
Oh no.
Yeah. I was so devastated. Yeah, I remember like I cried on her shoulder and everything.
Aw.
Um, but you know, I had a new life ahead of me in the U.S., and so I was optimistic, and it wasn't honestly like it really wasn't too bad. Actually, no, it was bad, but yeah, it could have been worse.
Did you walk away from it thinking that you learned XYZ and you're going to look for XYZ in the future?
No, like absolutely not. There's no consciousness. Like like I didn't. I pretty much never like went went about dating by figuring out like what I wanted, right? Like it was always like a very open-ended kind of thing. Like, because I know a lot of people are like, you know, I want this type of person, has to have these qualities, and then I want to be married at like 25 and have kids at like, you know what I mean?
I was
like
like
I'm
that,
kind
yeah.
of, yeah, no, I'm kind of like the opposite of that. Like even
Yeah, so tell me
today,
about your approach. Yeah, I'm curious about your approach.
my approach is like I just want to get to know the person, and in fact, like I don't even like to decide early on whether or not this is a friend or you know potential lover. Like I know a lot of people, it's like, you know, they say like within like the first minute or the first 5 minutes, like you decide whether or not you're gonna friend zone them, or like, you know, like I think that's a bit silly. I think that's very short sighted, and so, you know, I just kind of like to get to know somebody first, and then see where things go very organically, because it takes a long time to really get to know someone. And you know, like if you think that you can make these snap decisions about whether or not you want to date them that early on, I think that's it, you know, you could potentially make a lot of errors in your judgment.
So you're not into the gut feeling, thing that people sometimes they say like, oh, maybe it's not a snap. Like they don't think it's like a mental thing. They think it's like, oh, it just doesn't. Nothing in my gut is telling me that I want to date this person.
No, I listen to my gut. I just don't dismiss something if I don't feel something right away. Like I think people think that, you know, if you don't feel like, you know, butterflies and whatever in the first minute, then it can't be true love. But I think that's a bit short-sighted.
Yeah, I would replace that with, people think that they can't. Yeah, it can't be like true love, but it's more like that's just his infatuation. Like that's
Yeah.
not love. That's hormones.
Yeah, and there's a lot of projection, frankly. I think people project
Yeah.
a lot, you know, about like their what they think the person is, and you
Oh,
know,
for sure.
it's like then it's like a lot of the time I think people don't even really truly get to know somebody because they're just like acting on like their idea of what the person is.
So true. So then what happened? Then what happened when you moved over to the US? You were in college. Did you date anyone in college?
Let's see here. See, there was like one person right before college. I don't know if it's like notable enough to bring up.
Bring it up. We're here for story time. Bring it up.
Okay, let's bring it up. It is kind of interesting, actually. I don't know like how defining it is, but it is interesting. So back in the 1970s.
Well, you weren't born yet.
Yeah, so that right. So yeah, this is yeah, in fact. So back in the 1970s, so when China kind of opened up and started having diplomatic relations with the US, my dad was like one of the earlier people to be like traveling to the US, and he was working for the Ministry of Agriculture, and he worked closely with this Jewish American woman who worked at the USDA, and they stayed in touch. And it just so happened that they lived in Virginia, about 2 hours away from Charlottesville. And so I was put in touch with them, and she had a daughter who was also the same age and starting college around the same time. And so we got chatting over the summer, and I guess we were like internet boyfriend girlfriends.
Oh, uh-huh.
And then we met up, and you know there really wasn't any chemistry, so
The chemistry was like all online.
I think there was like a lot of hope, right? A lot of hope for me that I was gonna go to this like have this new life and go to the U.S. And I think it's even easier to just like not really see the full extent of the person when you're just like chatting online.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. So true. And the projections can get much stronger because like there's more blanks to fill in.
yeah, definitely.
Like speaking of filling in blanks, like even now, I've been noticing like people wearing masks that I sometimes I'm surprised when they take their mask off and I see the rest of their face, and I didn't realize I was mentally filling in what the rest of their face looked like.
Yeah,
I didn't even realize I was doing it, but they take off their mask. I'm like, whoa, that's a surprise. And I'm just like, Jess, why is that a surprise? You have never seen this person's face before. It
yeah,
should
that's
not be
so
a
true.
surprise. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's almost inevitable. I think it's really just inevitable that your brain fills it in. Like there's people that actually like, I'm very careful about masking. So for like a lot of the people that I work at my genome sequencing job, like they didn't see my whole face until like several months in, and that was very fascinating.
Were they surprised? Or what reactions
I
did you
don't
get when
know.
they finally did see the rest of your face?
I think I was probably more surprised from seeing their faces. Yeah, because I didn't really see their faces either because they all eat indoors at this area, and I was just like eating outdoors, so I never crossed paths with them when they had their masks off. But I remember being pretty surprised. Yeah.
So then what was your next relationship?
Okay, so this one I think is worth mentioning, right? So the next person I dated actually wasn't until my third year of college, and I think I think this was notable because she was Asian American. So this was like the first person of Asian descent that I was gonna date, and I think the most notable thing was that she really wanted to be with a white guy.
Mm, a common phenomenon.
And yeah, so like
Uh-huh.
I think she really just like wanted to be a white guy, and she talked about like these white guys that she had crushes on. Um, but I think I was just like kind of there and available,
Uh-huh.
and so it didn't do wonders for my self-esteem.
Yeah.
But I think it was like also the first time I really got exposed to this phenomenon of white worship. And when it comes to dating, you know, at a kind of personal level.
So what was that like? Tell me more. And like how did that end?
Yeah, I think I just like constantly felt like I was just like a placeholder until she found somebody better, and it made me actually feel like I that was like the best that I could do.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, so it didn't like help me feel desired in any way. So I'd say like, that was actually like a pretty bad relationship.
definitely. That sounds lots of ways of toxic.
But it was also quite short. I'd say like a lot of my relationships up until actually like fairly recently have been like pretty short lived. Oh, it's like thundering
Whoa.
outside.
I was like, yeah, what was that? I was like, someone dragging something in an empty garage. Why do you think, your relationship, like so many of them were short lived? Were you just kind of like getting to know somebody and then realizing, not a great fit?
I think they were short lived more than anything because I was just so insecure. And so like I was acting constantly on insecurity. And in order for a relationship to really work out, like you kind of have to like take a leap of faith that the other person actually likes you, or else if you're always acting in an insecure way, that is not only is that not conducive to a relationship, but it's just not attractive. I think the biggest affliction that comes with being insecure is not being bold to be yourself. And so then you just kind of like end up trying to fit yourself to what you think that person likes. And when you do that, it's just like, not only is it insincere, it's not authentic. You don't feel very good about it. And then I think most people can tell too that it doesn't feel very authentic.
Do you think you've grown out of that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So what helped you grow out of that?
I think that was like the biggest shift that's like completely changed and revolutionized my dating.
Yeah, that's huge to be able to be yourself and not trying to fill this thing that you think they're looking for. And just to know and believe that you're enough, right? Yeah, that's huge. How did you come to that? How did you really like, internalize that and then live it?
Well, I think the first step is that you have to kind of like believe that there is somebody out there that in particular like finds who you are as attractive and finds who you are, the real you, as interesting. The way that I got to believing that was treating dating as, so the way I managed to like figure that out was by going on a lot of dates, basically. So I went on Tinder and, I didn't, try to idealize anything. And this is like where my philosophy about like not idealizing people or not like, going by your projections about them come from, is that like, I just like went on as many dates as I could. And, even with people that, up until that point, I might have dismissed as like, oh, they're not my type. I think that was like the single best exercise to actually like throw away this concept of a type. Because on these dates I realized that a lot of what I thought I liked like was actually wrong. I also felt like, regardless of whether or not I felt like there was like a future, it was still a really good interaction. And being myself, the date was like always enjoyable. Like you can make like a really good connection with somebody. It doesn't matter. Like, I mean, maybe you just have one conversation and that's it, but it's still good. Maybe you become friends, But like when you're yourself, it allows for that authentic connection to happen. And like, going on a lot of dates and not feeling like, not feeling any performance anxiety, like just, was really what did it. And I would recommend that to everybody.
I agree. I completely agree with that. And I would also add, going on dates, especially if you're online dating, I think it's really important just to go on dates without any pressure of like, oh, I'm so worried that they won't like me. It's like, hold on. You don't even know if you like them, That's like,
Exactly.
and then that kind of, took the pressure off for me to be like, I'm going to go and maybe I won't like them, and then kind of get some of the power back, But how did you get to this place? How did you realize, like, okay, maybe I need to have a shift in strategy. Maybe I need to, go on these dates with people that I didn't think were my quote unquote type?
Well, the idea started because I felt like, so actually, the idea started because, so I played this competitive game called StarCraft. This is kind of funny, actually. And I've learned
That's a
many
video
life
game,
lessons.
right?
Yeah, it's a video game. It's considered the most difficult game, the most difficult esport. It's a very complicated game, but
Okay.
it's a game where there's this concept called tilting, and this concept actually comes from poker, which is where basically like when you feel so overwhelmed and anxious that you can't be level-headed, and that you can't like make wise decisions or even just like live in the moment. And that happens when you're matched. That often happens when you're matched with an opponent that's just like too good for you. And so I felt like I needed to kind of like lower the stakes a bit and lower the difficulty level. And for me, that just meant like, going on dates with people that maybe I don't think is like, that I wouldn't consider like, at the height of what I consider as most attractive. And that took away a lot of the pressure.
That is so fascinating that change in approach came from something that you were thinking about in your like hobby space, right?
Yeah, because with that game, exactly, like it's actually very difficult to improve or even just be introspective when you're constantly playing very difficult players. There's a concept called smurfing, which is where like you kind of like you throw a bunch of games so that then the system matches you with easier players, right? And it's kind of frowned upon in the community, but I find that bar none, that is like the best way to like test out something new or like to really just like explore. Because when you're in that high anxiety state, like you don't have any mental capacity to like explore.
Interesting. I love learning these terms that I've never heard of, but do seem like extremely relevant to regular social situations and life situations, and also are so catchy. Smurfing?
Yeah.
What a fun word. Yeah, so what is attractive? Well, I kind of want to like ask you some general questions, but I know we're like totally not even close to like getting to the present in your relationship history, but anyway, we can meander all we want, and
Well, but I think you were going to ask like what I found attractive, right? So like,
yes,
I think yeah. So this is very interesting because like I think everybody starts off with a very narrow definition of what they consider attractive. Like my definition was so narrow.
Oh, right, we were talking about this, right?
Yeah. Like my definition was so narrow that it was just like there's like it was like in the off chance that like I found somebody attractive, like chances are they weren't gonna find me attractive, and so like nothing was gonna happen.
Okay, so what did you use? Like, can you describe it more? What did you personally find attractive before you decided to, date more broadly and not stick to those ideas as much?
Yeah, like skinny white girls. That was like my type.
That's what you started off with. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, did you have like any type in terms of like skinny white girls that were like a certain personality archetype, or no, just like skinny white girls?
Yeah, I think that's the other thing, or at least for me, like, as I was younger, I cared a lot more about like the physical side. Because I guess I just, I didn't even like, I hadn't even interacted with enough girls on like, on the dating level to even be able to like think about what kind of personality types would mesh well with me.
So if I was talking to like teenage Steve and I asked him this question, he'd be like, "What? What do you mean?" Or maybe he would have been like, and then that would have set off a course of, a whole bunch of different philosophizing.
Actually, that's not true. Like I think I always kind of like found girls that were into like science and like something technical to be very attractive.
Oh, so skinny white STEM girls.
Yeah, which I'm still into.
Okay.
But it's just, it's like it's not the full extent of it.
It's not exclusively your type anymore.
Oh, not at all. Yeah, not at all.
So what do you find attractive now at 36?
Yeah, that's the incredible thing, right? The incredible thing is that when I realized that if you just change the way that you look at something, you can see anything that, something that you might have seen as a flaw as a feature.
Okay, that was a very serious Zen moment right there.
Right.
Nice.
So I'm not even sure I can say like there's like a certain type that I'm attracted to. I can't even say that there's really any type that I'm not attracted to.
Also, wow.
And I think that's so incredibly liberating. And I think it's really good because like, at that point, then you really start like embracing the complexities of life.
So then if you can't say, what you're attracted to and what you are not so much attracted to, then how do you choose who to be in a relationship with?
Yeah, and so that's a really good question. I think then it lies more on like the personality aspect, right? Like, the non-physical aspects matter so much more.
Oh, okay. See, that's an interesting thing, like just to hear, then your interpretation of the question, what are you attracted to, was physical, right? Because like,
because we were talking about the physical before.
Oh, I meant anything. Like, what are you what do you find attractive in general?
Okay. Yeah. So open-mindedness. That is like bar none the most important thing to me.
Yeah, actually, I have heard you say this before. Okay, this is ringing a bell.
Okay.
This is a consistent Steve from, I think, like 5 years ago.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool.
What else?
Yeah, open-minded and non-judgmental, and having like a curiosity for the world. Yeah, I think like that's really what does it for me.
I can see that. I think you are also all of these things.
And authentic, like authenticity, right? Like if they could be open, then that's like that's just like so important. Yeah, because I'm trying to have an authentic connection with people. It's difficult if somebody doesn't feel like they want to open up.
So authentic and being able to get vulnerable.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so maybe not like people that are very guarded and private. I see. Do you want to go back to the relationship history and give us like a summary of some of the other major happenings that bring you to the present in your dating history? But, or you can also just have like a few notable mentions.
Yeah, let's see here.
I'm not going to post this video, but for the listeners, Steve is in a serious thinking, stare into the distance face. I think is, yeah, a fun thing to imagine.
When I was doing my master's in London, I was in a 2-year relationship with a Korean girl, and it was long distance.
Where was she while you were
She
in
was
London?
living in South Korea. Yeah, she was living in South
Oh.
Korea, and I was living in London. And I bring that one up because the thing about a long distance relationship is that when you meet up, it's always going to be exciting. It's like hard to really get to know somebody on a deeper level in the sense of like just compatibility. I think because you meet up, it's always going to be exciting, and then it's like you part ways before any possible resentment can take place. So I think that was like the major takeaway from that. This is definitely like a different kind of relationship. It's like you have the comforts of feeling like you're not alone, but if you really think about it, it's not all that fulfilling.
Because you don't get to be together in person sharing a lot of things.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Okay. I'm just trying to decide how much I want to ask because we have about like 20 minutes left. Because there's like so many different avenues, like so many different tunnels to like explore still.
I don't mind going on for longer if you know.
Okay, okay. We can go on for a little bit longer if we want. Yeah, so this Korean girl, long distance, 2 years, you were in London. I guess like can you just give me and the listeners like a little bit more of the shape of that relationship in terms of like how did you meet? And were you guys ever in person, before the long distance?
So we met in South Korea. My parents were there. My dad was there for a conference, and so we met in South Korea. Really hit it off, and she was very open-minded. She was like a very curious person, and I love that about her. And we decided to keep it going because we really did like each other. So then, we had a lot of like online interactions, and then every few months or so we'd meet up, usually in like a third country.
Oh, wow.
So I remember like the first time we met up, after we had met, a few months later, it was like in Japan. And then we met up in like other countries like London. Sometimes she came to London. Sometimes it was like in Italy, in China, Hong Kong, like various places. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then did that terminate just because it just got too hard to be long distance? And like, were you guys dating with an eye towards like, oh, you can, stay together and try to hold out till you're in the same place?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? And I think it became very clear towards the end of it that she was more of a planner, and that, she wanted things to go towards the direction of like forming a family and having kids. And that wasn't something that was even remotely on my radar. And so it kind of ended because I quit my job in London and I decided to like move back to the US and just kind of like do that same reinventing myself that I did so many years before when I came here for college. I remember being like very sad, like letting her know that like, that I felt like we were not on the same page. And she completely understood. And, we ended up breaking up, but very amicably. I'm still good friends with her. And now she has a family and a kid, and I'm very happy for her.
Yeah, more of what she was looking for. Yeah, any other notable mentions?
And then a really notable relationship I had was when I came back to the U.S., and that lasted 6 years. And in that relationship, I learned how to talk openly and honestly with somebody, something that I never did before. So before that, I had just kind of like gone by guesswork. And I feel like a lot of people do that. And I think it's just not good. I think it's super important to just like be open and honest about things, because ultimately we're all human beings, and we shouldn't see our natural selves and natural propensities as faults or things to be ashamed of. And so I think just like really being honest with somebody like can completely transform the relationship and bring you closer on the level that you couldn't possibly be otherwise.
That's really beautiful. Yeah, I agree. It's a high bar that I feel like some of us strive for, but definitely I think like a very worthwhile pursuit.
I mean, it is not
Yeah.
easy, right? Like I've been doing this like for a few years now, and it's gotten easier over time, but it's not an easy thing to do.
And when you're talking about honesty, do you mean like brutal honesty, like just everything and anything, even if you think it might hurt their feelings, or like how far do you go?
I mean, brutal honesty.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like if it's something that like causes any kind of bother, then you have to talk about it.
What if it's something that doesn't cause you a bother?
Well, like what?
You know, you find someone else attractive, but you also know it's a fleeting thought. Then is that something you mention, or is that something you don't mention?
Right, but you're assigning, the importance level of fleeting thought as being unimportant. But you don't know, like that could be important to the other person. In fact, I would say that's actually quite important, especially in the way that most people are brought up in society as being like a monogamous society, right? Having a fleeting thought of seeing somebody else as attractive, I think, is something that you absolutely have to be honest about with the other person. And there's nothing wrong with it, because I think everybody has that moment. And if you can be honest about that, then like you can be honest about other things, and you can be relaxed and just, be yourself.
I think it also depends on like, who you're with. And I feel like some people don't necessarily want to hear about all of these fleeting thoughts because like you were saying, right? It's like, it depends on like assuming if they want to hear it or not. And I've also had partners where like I ask them if they want to hear about it, and they're like, no, I don't want to hear about it. TMI, and we can just like let it pass. Like that's like normal, animal brain thing. But also some other people are like, yeah, I totally do want to know about it, So I guess it does depend.
Yeah, I think the people who don't want to hear about it, I think they also tend to be the type of people that are more okay with living in denial.
Interesting. Why do you think that?
Well, why do they not want to hear about it? Does it make them upset?
No, I think some people, they, think if you think about it more, it kind of reinforces the thought. So it's like, okay, well, if it's fleeting, like let it go. And then if you think about it more, it might actually like encourage the thought.
I think if you suppress the thought, it encourages the thought.
Right, but if you let it pass, it might not be the same as suppressing, right? It's just...
Right, but what if you find like a coworker or something attractive and you can't get it out of your head, and and you think it's fleeting and you want it to pass, but it can't?
Well, if you can't get it out of your head, then it's definitely not fleeting. Then it's definitely something that I think people should talk about. But
I mean, I think if it's like even if it's like a fleeting thought, it's something that you can bond with the other person with.
Interesting.
Like with my current partners, like we talk about people that we find attractive all the time, and it's like a way for us to like connect.
So let's talk about your current relationship. And we've talked before about how you're approaching relationships now like in an open sort of way, right? Can you like tell us more about that? How did you come to wanting to be in more open relationships? And like what that setup is like now in this relationship?
I think the words, open relationship or like poly relationship, I think they can often be very charged. And I think it's one of those things where like people might have like a knee-jerk reaction to it without necessarily realizing that it's actually like they're very general terms, and people practice them in very different ways. I think what it means for me, really, the centerpiece to the polyamorous relationship isn't even the fact that you're seeing other people. I think it's actually the fact that you're being brutally honest about everything. Mm-hmm. And when you're that honest about things, like, it forces you to confront things and work things out in a way that you don't have to when you're in a monogamous relationship. I think for me, it's been like a huge way for me to grow and for my partners to grow, and ways for us to connect in a way that we just really wouldn't be able to otherwise. Because you really get to know the person. Like, I think with the traditional monogamous type of relationships, it's so easy to have a false sense of security. And you just like, it's so easy to just like leave things unaddressed. And before you know it, you're 60.
60 and what? I feel like.
And your life is over.
Oh, Steve, I hope we don't die at 60.
Well, no, I think you get to 60 and then you realize that man, you haven't really lived, that you haven't really been true to like what you want to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is obviously like a generalization. There's plenty of monogamous relationships that are very fulfilling, but I think it doesn't work for enough people that other types of relationships should be normalized.
So when did you realize that it didn't work for you?
I realized that when my then partner and I were fundamentally different in the number of people that we wanted to connect with. She was extremely introverted, and for her, connecting with even one person was like enough. And she was very busy. She was running her own business, and she just had very little time for me. And that had made our relationship grow into one where like I just felt very unseen and very unfulfilled. And so that was kind of when we started talking about the idea of opening up the relationship, because we really didn't want to end our relationship. Mm-hmm. So that's when we kind of like started talking about it and exploring that. Ultimately, I wanted to have emotional connections with other people as well. Mm-hmm. And that was something that made her very uncomfortable. And so that was actually what brought the relationship to an end.
Mm. So are you saying that was like the emotional connection part that was more challenging than like the physically connecting with other people part?
Exactly, yeah. Mm. Like, she really didn't have a problem with like, for example, like one night stands. Mm-hmm. But I found that just extremely unfulfilling, and I felt like, I really like, that's the thing like about the hookup thing, right? Like, I don't think I've ever really had like a hookup in the sense of like how society sees a hookup, because I feel an uncontrollable desire to get to know the person. Mm. And so it's very difficult for me to feel fulfilled when it's like just a purely physical thing.
Growing up watching American rom-com messaging, it's all like, oh, sometimes like guys, males can just like connect physically and then have like no emotional thing. And I mean, I think this is good to mention that like, okay, it really doesn't work that way for everybody. No matter what like body parts you have, doesn't mean that you can just connect physically and find that satisfying. So circling back to white worship and dating as an Asian person in the U.S., can you just talk more about like, the challenges with that and kind of where you are now with how you're dealing with all that?
I think most people, when they grow up in like a society where this is complicated to talk about.
You can take your time, or we can pass.
I think can we go more specific? No, because I want to talk about it, right? Because
Okay.
I think there's just like quite a few concepts in there at the same time, and it kind of like makes it hard for me to, come up with like a grand general
It doesn't have to
statement.
be. It doesn't have to be grand in general. Yeah, I guess I'm mostly just curious about like your specific experience, right? So, did you do you notice the girls looking for like girls not looking for Asian guys? Because, but like specifically when you're on dating apps, does it happen all the time when you're trying to date? Because
Okay, yeah, I can talk about that.
yeah, there's like all these stats out there about dating on apps in the U.S. being the hardest for Asian males and Black females. Like, does that kind of resonate with your experience?
Yeah, I think when we live in a society where whiteness is still considered like the thing to aspire to, that influences people's mate selection, like partner selection in a big way. For a long time, I was in denial of the fact that as an Asian person, the odds were stacked against me when it came to dating in this society. And I think once I acknowledged that, it actually made it a lot easier for me to just figure out how to work with what I've got. Because like when you're in denial about it, you try to take advice that's like really doesn't work out too well for you, because most of the advice is for the majority, which is, in this country, the majority are white people.
I'm really making you think, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already 9 over there too. Sorry, and on a day you're not feeling, physically the best. You and me both. I can barely find my words too.
Because like here's the thing, right? Because like I have to, like if I'm just talking to you about this thing, like the language that we use would be very different than if we're talking to like a wider audience. And so now like I'm trying to like have to like talk about it in such a way that people won't get the wrong idea about it, and that's what makes it
Right.
difficult.
Take your time. It's only 6 over here. Wow. All the bad jokes come when I'm tired.
I think there's like two major studies. Like one is statistics from OkCupid's dating selection, and it was just like Asian guys and like black girls were like at the very bottom of the totem pole. And I remember like for Asian guys, it was like not only it was like across the board, like including Asian women did not want to date Asian guys. And I think that was like the most stark thing to, that surprised a lot of people, because I think the commonly held belief is that people like their own kind. And I think what we're seeing is that like that's actually not true. That's anecdotally, right? Like I've, for example, like the number of times that like I think people are like a lot, they realize that it's like not as PC now to say, but like in the past, when I've been interested in somebody, like I've gotten a lot like just like, oh, I'm not into Asian guys, like I don't date Asian guys.
And then you're just like, ugh, okay, well, I am an Asian guy. What am I going to do about that?
Yeah, it really does feel, it is like a big blow, right, for somebody to
Yeah.
say that. I think especially when like an Asian girl says that, I think.
And I feel bad, now that I'm a little bit more aware of this, thinking back to how I was when I was dating when I was younger. I definitely was guilty of this. And also, not realizing, well, I think I realized, but, kind of didn't know what to do about that realization, because, I definitely realized that growing up here in the US, having a lot of media thrown at me of like what is an attractive male, and it was like mostly white males or males of, other races, but I, didn't have a crush on an Asian person until, I was in college. And that was the first time that I realized like, wow, okay, why haven't I somehow grew up around a lot of Asian guys, but I had blinders on. And I had crushes on like white guys and like Hispanic guys and black guys, but just somehow, and I think a lot for me, a lot of it was media because, I saw other people more in media, not, for Hispanic and black guys, not as much as I saw white guys, but still more than I saw Asian guys in media, by like certain standards that were deemed by American society at that point to be, commonly held as like attractive. And so, I remember like, when I was in college and like even afterwards, in my early 20s, mid 20s, still just, sometimes like saying to my friends, like, oh, I don't find Asian guys attractive. I'm not attracted to Asian guys. And like not realizing how that's like very damaging, very damaging for Asian guys to hear, but also like, very problematic for me to think. But now I'm married to an Asian guy, so it's come full circle.
I think what that does, right? Like, when you're being told that like, people are not into Asian guys, like they're not into Asianness, I think what ends up happening is that then you develop like a certain kind of self-hatred.
Yeah.
And so, what Asian guys end up a lot of the time doing is like they want to try to like aspire to whiteness, to like distance themselves from like their Asianness. And so actually like my one of my current partners like tells me like that she sees on dating sites, on dating apps, like a staggering number of Asian guys that will write in their profile, not your typical Asian.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Like what the is that supposed to mean,
Yeah. And it's funny because I did the same. Like I did the same when I was dating. I would like try to dress a certain way, look a certain way, because I didn't want to be your quote unquote typical Asian girl, because I thought that, that meant I was stereotypically meek. I was stereotypically, soft spoken or unassertive, or, all these things that are really not true, but like, are they not true because I was fighting against it the whole time? I don't know. Maybe.
I think it comes down to the fact that society at large still like sees Asians as this like, very monolithic one type of personality kind of thing. And like does not see that there's like a whole spectrum of different types of people for people of any race,
Right, exactly. And that's like, that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this podcast, right? Just invite a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds to just talk about themselves, and try to give more space and representation to people from, all sorts of backgrounds, and to be like, okay, well, do I sound like someone who fits your perfect stereotype of XYZ? Probably not, because we're all people, right? We're all just people.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Yeah, and I think, and I was also guilty of the same thing, right? Like what I did especially in college was like I tried to play up like the fact that I grew up in Italy. And it's like it's like a really conflicting thing to do, because it's like, on the one hand, like it has shaped me, but like in many cases, like it's shaped me in a way that like was not positive. Like it was like I faced a lot of racism there, right?
Yeah.
And so it's difficult to like, speak in positive terms and aspire and like, play up like a part of your identity that actually like is kind of painful.
Yeah. I'm glad you don't do that anymore, right? Now you don't feel the need to do that anymore.
Yeah, definitely. No,
I'm so glad we like grew out of these things.
Eventually. It's like so, it's just like so miserable to be in that state of like not being able to see your self-worth, really.
Yeah.
You can acknowledge that there's been like, Asian influence on you, Asian cultural influence on you without having that, be like the one identifying thing about you.
Well said.
One anecdote like really pops in my mind. It's, a few years ago, I had this friend, she was from Singapore, Chinese Singaporean, and she wanted to do like a double date with me. And at the time she was like, dating this like stereotypically like six foot tall white cis male. and she wanted to do like a dim sum Chinese New Year kind of thing, and it's just essentially to like seek his approval, to so he can like see something nice about Chinese culture. So she wanted to go to a dim sum place, but she was very adamant on not going to a dim sum place that served chicken feet.
What?
Yeah,
That's
because
the best part of dim sum.
right, and she called it. She said, let's find a restaurant, let's find a dim sum place that doesn't serve, and I quote, she said, that doesn't serve the weird stuff.
Oh no, girl.
And I think that was like,
Oh no.
especially offensive because it's like she's kind of like taken on the same kind of like white majority way of looking at other cultures,
Yeah.
which, somehow like that's seen as weird.
Yeah, that's a very colonized way of thinking for sure. That like some of these things that are not common in the US are, somehow weird and bad
Exactly.
when they're in
Yeah.
fact so freaking delicious. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
exactly. But like, even if you don't like it, right? Like there should be you should not feel ashamed about
Exactly.
that aspect of your culture or any aspect of
Yeah.
your culture, of your parents' culture or your ancestral culture.
Well said again. Yes, I agree. Yeah. Even if it's not delicious. So I'm curious, some of your notable mentions that you mentioned today in terms of your relationships. There was a Czech girl, there was an American girl that you were kind of talking to online, and there was this Korean girl that you were with, and then I assume some Americans
Yeah.
after that. For those cross-cultural relationships, did you guys like notice some of the cultural differences, and how did you deal with them?
What comes to mind, right? Like, like when we talk about this question of how like, people of two different cultures like end up interacting, it reminds me of this reality show, 90 Day Fiance.
Oh. If I can count the number, okay, if I had like a quarter or a nickel or whatever for every time someone's mentioned that to me since Ruben and I have been like on this green card journey, I would have a lot of nickels.
But I want to say what I want to say, like after having watched that show. So I think it really depends on whether or not the two people subscribe and fit into their respective cultures. And I think what that means is like, when you subscribe and fit into a certain culture without questioning it, then mindset wise, you're very monocultural, and it's very difficult for you to see things from like a different cultural perspective. And so then you get like, the cultural misunderstandings and the cultural like disagreements that you see on 90 Day Fiance. I guess I did kind of talk about this, right? Of like the type of people that I mesh well with is like people who don't subscribe to like one particular culture and who like are able to see things from like another perspective. And when it's two people like that, then like the culture isn't even like, it's a non-issue, like it's not even there, like you don't even see that. And I think that's like the most amazing thing, because then whatever things you're talking about, it's not talked about in like a cultural framework, it's just talked about as like individual differences.
Interesting, 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 interesting. Because I'm thinking about Ruben and of course, he's Sri Lankan and I'm American, Taiwanese American. And, in a lot of ways, I don't ascribe to a lot of things. I don't consciously ascribe to a lot of things that are quote unquote culturally American. And I didn't grow up in Taiwan, but, and I don't consciously subscribe to a lot of things that are culturally Taiwanese. And I think the same for him, and that's kind of part of why he's interested in like living here in the U.S. But, and maybe part of why we mesh. But also I think a lot of times the subconscious like things that we do and just like how we grew up really come into play for us a lot of times, like in terms of, most obvious is like references, but like less obvious, like a lot of times it's like communication style. Like sometimes you grow up in a certain society, people communicate in a certain way in terms of like, for example, like here, you know, certain things are kind of communicated pretty directly. And then other cultures, sometimes it's like people just don't talk that directly. And then hints are kind of gotten much more subtly, you know, that maybe aren't always picked up by someone like me who's like more direct. So that's kind of, you know, interesting to me. Like that, like what you're saying is really interesting to me because it doesn't really like kind of fit how I think about it.
I do. No. So the thing that you said that I want to speak on, right, is this idea of like being direct or indirect. I think I personally think that it's like a misleading idea. I think it's actually like a fallacy when people say that Americans are more direct than, say, like Asian cultures. I don't think that's true. I think every society or every culture is just direct and indirect about different things.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Go on.
And so then, you know, like to an American, obviously, like from the American point of view, when they look at things that to them should be communicated directly, and they see that people from a different culture don't do it directly, then they say, okay, well, that means that culture is just indirect. But that's not true, because there's like certain things that Americans communicate very indirectly that in other cultures are very direct.
Yeah, maybe it only feels direct to me because, you know, I'm picking it up, right? In a certain way.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's actually the reason why like people see it that way. I think the directness and indirectness of every culture around the world it probably nets out to about the same. It's just like distributed in different ways in terms of like what you're direct and what you're indirect on. So that's like, you know, if that's the case, then I think it's important to avoid, you know, implying things if you didn't grow up in the same town. You know what I mean? Like, because like when you grow up, the closer you are in proximity, right? Like for example, people within your family, you can do a ton of communication very indirectly. Because like, you know, you say something and then it's like essentially implied. But as you like, you know, go farther away, it's like you can't do that anymore. And you have to say things very explicitly. And I'm like a firm believer in like saying things explicitly anyway, just to avoid, you know, the potential for misunderstanding.
Now I'm doing the thinking face.
Like one of my partners is from Tennessee, and the way that people communicate in the South is a lot more indirect than here up in the North. And you can get to a lot of misunderstandings. Because then like the people in the South are thinking that they made something very, very clear, and it's not obvious.
Right.
To somebody who didn't grow up in that culture.
Right.
So I think that is something that, you know, I have faced. But it's something that we recognize is something to try to like avoid. That it's actually better to be as direct as possible.
But I think even that's a cultural thing. Like, well, I guess it could be an individual thing too. But you know, I think for some people, you know, it's not how they grew up, and it's really uncomfortable to be explicit. And that's the other thing, you know, I think like with Ruben and I, we kind of talk about, sometimes we struggle with like, you know, I tend towards the explicit and tend to require an explicit explanation or description of something that's going to happen for me to like input it as like, okay, now I get what he's talking about. But, you know, for him, maybe he'll give me 50% of that, and he'll think that like the 50 remaining percent is so obvious that it shouldn't have to be explained because there's not enough time in the day, you know? And he doesn't want to because he's like, oh, but it's obvious.
But you only have to explain it once.
But for everything, it's, you know, to me, it's a different thing. But yeah, a lot of times he's like, well, but that's the same thing.
For the particular situation, though, what I'm saying is for the particular situation, he only has to explain it explicitly once. So next time the exact same thing happens, you know, you'll understand. So I think it's important to do it the first time.
Well, he's going to listen to this, so he'll hear why you think so.
Well, the reason why I think so is because it becomes part of getting to know the other person.
I agree. Yeah.
Because if he doesn't do it, then how else are you going to really get to know him and how he thinks?
Exactly. Thanks for saying this out loud, Steve. Yeah. Maybe if he hears it from someone else, he'll be like, okay, maybe that makes sense.
I mean, no, I mean, I get where he's coming from, right? Like things that you're used to not being direct about. Like it's hard. Like you kind of have to push yourself to do. Like people are indirect for a reason, and cultures find certain things to be indirect about for a reason, because it's like difficult to talk about in an explicit way.
Yeah.
But I think the more you can do it with your partner, like the more you can really connect with them, and in a way that that there's nothing that's being misunderstood.
I strongly agree.
I mean, the thing that's hard about the 90-day fiancé thing is that both parties are like, no, my way of communicating, my culture's way of communicating is the right one.
Uh-oh.
You know what I mean? And then you're kind of at an impasse.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm not sure yet. I'm still, digesting kind of what you were talking about, like your observation about maybe every culture nets out to the same amount of directness and indirectness. That's a really interesting thing. I'm going to think about that.
I mean, I think about that in the sense that I think human nature is pretty universal. And, people just have different cultural practices and cultural norms to satisfy the exact same, human desires and needs is what I mean.
I see. Cool. Well, we're going to wrap up in a little bit. Is there anything else you want to add or share with the listeners about anything we talked about today, or any random other thing?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we haven't talked a lot about my current relationships, which I've done so much growing in the past year. But at the same time, it's it's not something that you can just spend 10 minutes and have it really be complete and succinct. Right.
Do you want to do a part 2?
Or maybe we can see what people think, right? If they find it interesting, then maybe it warrants a part 2.
Listeners, hey listeners, I'll definitely let y'all know how to let me know if you want a part 2 with Steve with his more recent relationships.
Oh, and then maybe people can send in hard-hitting questions, right? And then I can be on the hot seat.
Yeah, I mean, I have also some more hard-hitting questions. If we had a part 2, definitely we could put you in a hotter seat.
I think that sounds good.
Sounds good. Yeah, I love talking to you, as always.
Same.
You definitely make me think. I think today I made you think too, which is fun. I feel like every time we hang out or talk, by the end, after we part ways, I'm always a little bit doing this thing where I'm doing now that listeners can't see, but I'm staring off into space, thinking about this concept or this kind of philosophy or this whatever, way of thinking that you introduced to me that I've never heard before, because you are a very unique thinker. So I always appreciate that about you.
Yeah, just trying to make it work when you have such a hard time fitting in,
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out Steve's photography at stevegongphoto.com and follow him on Instagram at stevegong. If you like this podcast, remember to follow us and share with your networks to help us grow. We are also on Instagram at TheCultureful, where you can message us to let us know if you want a follow-up episode with Steve and any questions you would like me to ask him. This episode was edited by Ruben Yanarubin. I'm Jess Lynn. See you soon.